happy to see you guys again. Since this is being recorded, I have to let everybody know you're being recorded. So everybody, you are being recorded. So no bad swears. Now there's a couple of things that I wanted to do tonight. One is I wanted to go over the structure with skin, and I wanted to show some of the everybody's examples of what people have turned in. I think there's two examples that have been turned in that I think are both really good. I also was going to show a couple of, I have been grading and stuff, and I was almost done, and then I noticed today that people turned in more stuff. So I had to do some more grading. If I'm trying really hard to make sure that I get stuff done graded within 5 days when you turn it in. I did not do that with the houses and the wire because I was kind of hoping to get more stuff in before I start grading. But I will be doing that from now on. So if you turn stuff in and after a week it hasn't been graded, please email me and remind me. Now, so I wanted to go over the structure of the skin thing. I wanted to talk about the house and probably see some of the wire things as well. I really like, everybody has been really pretty good about submitting things in the discussion so everybody can see images of their work. I wanted to mention something about that with the submissions, but then I also wanted to show a couple examples of people doing their artistic critiques of their own work and somebody else's work. And the reason that's important is there are about 20 people in the class this semester, and everybody needs to record one of those critiques. Everybody needs to record two critiques. One that is a critique of their own work as if they've never seen it before, and the other is a critique of somebody else's work in the class. And that's why we have all those discussion boards so you can share your images with everybody. They need to be about 3 to 5 minutes long at the most, 5 minutes. Remember, if they're 30 minutes long, you get an automatic fail. And I still remember that one person I told you about it was 33 minutes long. Do you remember that? It was horrible. I mean, bless her heart, she tried really hard, but she was so nervous, and I did not have the bravery to stop her, which this is one of the reasons why I like having people record it as a video and submitting it, because then when it gets too long, I can just stop the video. But I wanted to do that and show some examples because even though it's not due until the end of the term, you will get extra credit if you turn it in early, for one thing, but also they represent fewer things that you have to worry about towards the end of your term. A lot of you are taking things like ethics and really big project heavy courses because that's just the part of your university career that you're at right now. And I really don't want this class to contribute unnecessarily to the stress levels that I know you guys are dealing with. All of you have jobs, all of you have other things to worry about. And so if we can, again, if you do those critiques early, you will get extra credit for them. And in some cases, that's what saves somebody because they don't do a very good job, but that doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, you guys do a good job. When we look at those examples, I want you to go to say to yourself as we go through, try to make a marker where our mental note where they are talking about each of the 4 steps of artistic critique. And again, what are those 4 steps? And we'll go over it again in about a half an hour. What's the first step of artistic critique?
Description.
Description. Excellent. Very good. It's the what. Excellent. What is the second step? Paula or Becca? Description addresses the what, and next we want to address the how. So which step of artistic critique is that?
Wouldn't that be analysis?
Yes, exactly. It is analysis. And the third one is the why. So which is that step? Paula or Becca, either one of you guys? Interpretation. Excellent, Paula. Very good. It is you're examining what, or you're extrapolating what you think the artist's worldview might be and what the work actually means. So excellent. And then what is the last step?
Evaluation?
Right. It's whether or not it's successful. So excellent. Those are the four steps. So when you guys do your artistic critiques, there's a number of ways to do it. One is you can make a Teams call where you're the only person on the call. You do a screen share where you share an image of the item that you're critiquing. And then you record your voice as you go through it. And the only image that comes through is the artwork. Another way of doing this is to film with you just recording your narration, and the only image that we see on screen is an image of the artwork you're critiquing. Other people have filmed themselves with their phone, and instead of filming their face, they will set up a tripod where they're holding their sculpture, or they have their use the tripod to point the phone directly to the sculpture. And you can do that. I've also had people set up their phone so that they're filming their computer screen with an image of the sculpture. So there's a number of different ways to do it. I have even had a couple people with really extraordinary social anxiety over the years, and that's something that I struggle with all the time. Over the last 20 years, I've developed a number of tools that I use so that people can't tell that I have social anxiety unless I tell them. And but in cases of extreme social anxiety, I have had people write a script and they have had somebody else do the voiceover from the script that they wrote on the critiquing the item that's in the art piece that's in the screen. And again, the art piece for these critiques needs to be either something that you made this semester for this class, that is for the self-critique, and for the critique of somebody else's artwork, it is one of the pieces that you see on one of the discussion boards that somebody else in this course made for this class. And I want to make sure that that's really clear in everybody's mind, because I have had people submit critiques of work that they've done 2 years ago. I've also had people submit critiques of work that they found when they were on vacation in Amsterdam. And that's not going to count, unfortunately. The self-critique, again, needs to be for a piece of work that you did for this course, this semester. And the peer critique, or the critique of somebody else's work, needs to be one of the pieces that you see on one of the discussion boards of another student in this same course this semester. All right. Is that clear for everybody? All right. Excellent. I wanted to touch on, before we go into the structure of the skin subject, I wanted to touch on just a couple of the sculpture-based photography images. So I'm going to pull up the discussion and look at that. It's going to take a minute or two to load, I think. Okay. And I want you to look at the houses and see how well done a lot of these houses are, because you guys did a really good job. And if you didn't get full points, and I said something about the house could have more texture and color on it, look at what these people are doing. And to get the remaining points, you would just need to gussy up your house and then resubmit it. But I think that this is an excellent example. This is a really good house. It looks to me like it's made with, the roof has the corrugated cardboard that looks something like clay tiles, and then or shingles. And then you also have this hot glue that's dribbled down, so it looks kind of like melting water dripping down. You have some really interesting textures here, and in the front of the house, you have some really interesting stuff going on there. And one of the reasons I really like this is because there are so many interesting lights and darks in this because of all the texture. And I think it's fascinating. And I really like how this person has done extreme close-ups from inside and from outside and taken some really interesting shots. Then we look at this house, and this is really kind of a fun one because, again, you see the texture that they did on the roof here and how they painted the newsprint that they used for the sides. I think this is really interesting. It almost looks like birch bark. I know it's not, but it almost looks like that. I think that's fascinating. And this is kind of fun because they had little teeny tiny cups that they put moss in, so it looks like arborvitae, on either side of the porch. I think that's really a very cool look. And I really like this one with the dog looking at the house. There's some really interesting shots here. And I love this where the house itself is small, and then they have this really, really tiny toy that you see as well. They do that with a couple different toys. I think that, and then you have another shot with the dog here. I think this is kind of a fun one. I think that, looking at the other houses, it would be kind of fun to see some texture work done on this one. I think that would make it really interesting, I think. And this roof, yeah, I think that would make it a lot more fun for me to see it. Just a little bit more texture, a little bit more stuff going on. I think that'd be kind of cool. Like one thing that I've seen people do is you've probably seen the spray, what's it called? Like spray stone, where it looks like granite or something like that. You've seen that, haven't you? You have 2 or 3 different coats where you put an undercoat, then you spray a texture on, then an overspray, and it looks kind of like a stone finish. I think something like that, just like with one of those, a texture spray on a paper structure would make it look kind of like a stucco house. That would be kind of a fun one. I like this one. This is kind of fun too. It has a really interesting texture on the roof and has some fun things going on with the windows and the shutters, and has some really cool images there. I like this one. This feels like a beachside property, which I always think is kind of funny in Utah, but lots of color, lots of really interesting texture going on. I think that's kind of fun to see. And a cat. This is kind of a fun one. It's an unusual house, and this person used some really interesting materials for this with some texture. This area looks a little bit aged, so it has a little bit of historical presence to it. And this is kind of a fun use of different textures. I think that's an engaging and interesting house to photograph. I think this one is a really cute one. This is more of a lean-to type structure, and I think that the photos are really interesting. This is another one where I think I like what was going on in the roof, and something like that, instead of black, maybe dark brown or something like that on the sides, I think would make this interesting. I love the addition of the swing of the chair there. And most of these, every one of the 5 shots is different. And there's a couple where it's the same setup and the person just stepped on different sides of it. And if you want more points, you can submit a couple of the other shots that you have. I did have one person who set their house up in a little diorama, and then their 5 photos were just them walking around the same diorama. And so they only got credit for 1 photo because it wasn't the 5 settings, and if it's something where you have an image like this, And then in the same setting, you have the backlighting. So it's image like that. I think that would count for 2 settings. But if it's just walking around the same thing with the same lighting, then that's just the one setting. But I really like this kind of playing with the scale with the toy giraffe. I think that's a really nice touch. This is kind of fun with some interesting things on it. Makes for a really interesting house. I think that's fascinating use of extra texture. This is a really fun one. I like how the person made this and made it. I don't know. It's a tiny house, but they even used screen for the screen door, and I think that's really kind of fun. I love the irony of this, a chicken coop in a chicken coop. I think that's great. And being in the fridge over the eggs, that's very creative. This is kind of a fun one. I like this because there is a lot of texture going on. The person used, it looks like scrap paper or collage to get that wood texture on the outside. And the way that they textured the roof makes it look really interesting. And I like this one with the painted bricks and the different stuff going on. These, I don't know what kind of material that is exactly. It looks like yarn balls for the bushes there. I think that's kind of a fun touch. And then a dog. This is kind of fun whether you go right inside and you see the stuff on top of the roof there of the, oh no, I'm sorry. I thought this was the house right here. It's kind of fun to see that the wood kind of reflects this. I think this is one of those where it might be interesting to cut the windows spaces out so you can see into or through the house. That's kind of a fun one with the way it's lit. Oh, poor house with the kaiju dog. This is an interesting one. I like the cutout right there, and I like the texture painted on there. This feels more like a tower. That's really kind of interesting with the lighting on the inside. Yeah, it looks like a tower kind of thing with a little bit of a walk around the top there. So there's some really interesting ones, I think you guys can see all that. And one thing that I did notice is that a couple people, we talked about this over the last couple of weeks, where my computer does not recognize certain file types. And I mentioned JPEG, you're putting it into a PDF. If my computer doesn't read the file, doesn't recognize the file type, you'll get a 0 until you resubmit. Just use a file converter program online and resubmit your files as a JPEG or put them all into a PDF document. I also teach a couple other classes, and there's things like the documentation work log that needs to be typed. And I've had people turn that in handwritten. And so that will also get a 0 until it's resubmitted as a typewritten document. So remember to do that. Make sure that like your work logs are typed, your essays are typed. I've actually had a couple of people in this, not in this semester, it was actually last semester. They sent in their essays handwritten, and this is a university class, and the expectation is everything's typed. So remember that. And again, if the score is other than what you want, look at what I've written, and if you need some clarification, let me know, and then just resubmit. I noticed also on the couple of the quizzes, on each of the quizzes, if you don't get a perfect score, I've written down which questions need to be readdressed. A lot of you are doing really, really good. I think that the quiz average in this class is like 94%, something like that. So, which is really nice. And when you resubmit the quiz, you need to resubmit take the entire quiz and not just the question that needs to be redone, because the way Canvas works is when you resubmit, it erases the previous submissions. So if you take your quiz and you miss 2 or 3 of the questions before retaking it, do screenshots so you know what you answered because you only got them right, and then just redo the whole quiz and correct those couple missing questions in addition to re-answering everything else, and then you'll get the points. The other way to do it is if there's only one question that's off, you can submit the correct answer through the comments on the quiz. If you choose to do that, you need to email me, because I have done what I'm supposed to do with Canvas. So it lets me know when people add comments or discussions, but it doesn't always do that. So whenever you resubmit, it's always safest just email me and let me know, and I'll take care of it just as soon as I can. Oh, hi Abby. I'm sorry if I didn't say hi earlier. I see that you joined us as well.
Hi, sorry, I was a little slow joining.
No, that's no problem at all. So any questions about the stuff that I've talked about so far? All right. Okay, excellent. Now, I want to move forward a little bit to the structure with skin. A couple of people have finished this. And again, I really don't want people to stress out. The due dates for everything are there specifically so that Canvas can keep telling you to keep moving forward. And several people have said, hey, I'm not getting this done. I'm almost done with it and stuff. And that kind of thing is perfectly fine. I will never refuse to extend a due date. If you let me know what's going on, I'm happy to do whatever I need to so that you have, the greatest opportunity for success. That being said, the due dates are there specifically so that you can kind of be aware of staying on track. And if the due dates are too close together and you don't feel like you have enough time, let me know and I will adjust the due date. I mean, that's what we did a week or two ago. Excuse me. So I am happy to do that. When we talk about with the structure with skin, this is a 3-dimensional object where you build a module that you replicate, and the module you build out of sticks, and then you replicate it so you have 5 or 6 versions or copies of the module. You add your skin to areas of the module, and then you put them together. And as we can see in these examples, this first example here, the module is this kind of crate-like box where it's just the edges are defined with the sticks. And then the crates are not all the same. Some of them have triangle cutouts and different things like that, but they're all based roughly on that crate. And I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these. And this one, the person, at some of them, the skin is attached to 2 sides. A couple others, the skin is attached to only 1 side. In many cases, the skin is right on the sticks. And then you can see right here and right here, the skin or this cardboard area is elevated off by about 1/4 of an inch. And on this one, it's by about 1/2 an inch. So the person used the module, but all the modules are not identical. Some of them are a little different. Some of them are quite a bit different. And the skin wasn't always applied the same way. But when we look at this, you can see that there is a replicated shape, can't you? And that's what we're looking for. And in this middle one, of course, the replicated shape is absolutely identical. You have these structures that are made out of several triangles, and then 2 of the triangles are covered with paper and the rest are not. So the person took 4 of them, put them together so they kind of spiral up this way, and then the other 4, the second 4, they put it on so that they spiraled up that way, kind of almost a mirror to this. Now, both of these, you'll notice, do a really good job of activating three-dimensional volume around it. This one goes a little bit to the back and then comes forward, goes up and a little bit to the back. This one spirals up at the same time. It spirals up, it spirals to the back. Then this one, the module is a little bit more difficult to define. Looks like to me the module is a trapezoid and a trapezoid stuck together. And because it was a simpler module, they made several of them. And then they just put paper on one piece of each of those pairs of trapezoids. And in some cases, they made triangles out of the paper. And this becomes really interesting because the way that they put it together, it kind of snakes forward and back, and then it starts snaking upwards. And I think it's really interesting. But that gives you 3 different examples of how people solve this. Again, making one module, replicating it so you have 4 to 6 copies of the same module, putting some skin on it, and then putting them together. Now, I wanted to show you examples of 2 of these that have been turned in that I thought they did a really good job. So we're going to look at this one. Now, this one, the module is actually, you can see this triangle form right here and a second triangle form behind it, and they're separated by about 1 inch of space, which is bridged by the popsicle sticks. So can you see that? There's 2 triangles facing each other, separated by about 1 inch or so, and that's what the module is. Can everybody see that? And then on this, some of them they put, like on this one, they put the paper on all 3 of those narrow sides. Here they put the skin or the paper on 1 triangle. Here they put the skin on 2 of the narrow sides. Here they put the skin on 1 narrow side. And so they're just kind of playing with where they put the skin. On that back one, you can see the skin is one of the triangles. And then you'll notice also that with this module, when they put it together, instead of just leaving it at that, they also took skewer sticks and added a little bit of texture by putting the skewer sticks in between several of the modules. And so you guys can see this, right? Okay, all right. And I think that this is a really interesting solution. I think it's also interesting that it's not always a flat piece. Like this is one solid piece of paper. This one is a strip of one color of washi paper and then another color. So it looks like they used a translucent white and kind of a cream. And they're altering that a little bit. You'll see that like this triangle is on its narrow base. This next triangle is rocking forward on one corner, and the triangle after that is rocking backwards, but that corner is joined. Then this one kind of mirrors the first one again, but in this case, it's stepped out so that that leading edge is free, and it's the back edge that's lined up. And then the others are just kind of playing with that theme. And I think that's a really interesting way of doing it. This feels to me almost like it would be a really cool piece of playground equipment that you would never want your kids on. And I think that is a really cool thing. Then this one, I really like this one. This one looks to me like it's designed as a maquette for a really large structure. I think another, you can see the module here. You can see this kind of kite shape right here with this leading edge and these other edges right here. So it looks like it's a kite shape with this almost pyramid type structure on top of it. And there's 4 of them. Now this one, they could have put this together in another way too, so that this kind of stands up, but I think it works pretty well with it kind of walking back like that as well. And you can see from up above, it's really obvious that these are the kite shapes. And I think that that's really interesting. One thing I like about this is that the skin on it is almost entirely clear. And they added some interest by doing these parallel lines in the skin. And what's interesting to me is that none of these parallel lines, you know, the way that the skin is applied, none of them line up with each other. They're all different. Even though it's placed in the skin is placed in a very similar spot in each of these 4 modules, it's really well done because it's establishing a rhythm that we talked about, and then changing the rhythm so that you are drawing the viewer in with some interest. And I think that that turned out really well. I think it goes well. So I am going to stop sharing that. Well, actually, no, before I stop share, I want to just invite comments from you guys. Do you see what's going on with the structure and skin? And I'd like each of you, those without speakers, you can type your thing into the chat. Those of you with speakers, please make your comments out loud. What do you think about these structures with skin structures, like this one? I would like a couple of people to comment on that one. What do you guys think about it? What do you see in, or what do you recognize that it is being successful to the assignment?
I really appreciate the texture of the skin in this one.
What do you like about it?
I just feel like it almost adds an additional feel of what they have going on in their full sculpture. That you're having kind of the lines and the movement. I feel like it almost mirrors their design of the structure, and that stands out to me.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Using the washi paper, you have these rather organic lines going back and forth on the washi paper, and it really, like you said, um, Abby, it really makes a nice counterpoint to all these really straight lines that are intersecting and crisscrossing each other. So you have the crisscrossing texture idea repeated, but in a slightly different way. I think that is a fun level of engagement visually. One other person, what comment would you like to make about it? Okay, Diana, don't do that. So Paula or Becca, one of you two, what do you think about it?
I did make a comment that I like how the lines and shapes overlap while you look at it. I don't know if that meant.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. Are you talking about like the way that the skin kind of hides and then is hidden by the sticks almost? Like when you talk about overlapping, is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, I think kind of how there's already the existing shapes with the sticks, but then because of the skin hiding areas, it like makes more shapes, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's a really fun observation because that's what one of the principal goals for this project. So yeah, that's a perfect observation. Thank you. I think it is, one of the things we talk about is rhythm and expectation. Another way to involve a viewer is having them kind of sense energy and follow lines around. And this definitely has a lot of energy because of all the diagonals. And I think another one is to incite curiosity. And like what Paula just said, the paper kind of hides some parts where you can see other elements of the same thing. Like this vertical stick right here is hidden by these two pieces of paper and then continues right there and stuff like that. Every time you do something like that, which makes the viewer want to move their head around and get a different view, even though it's a photograph, it's a really good way of interacting with your viewer and exciting their curiosity. So excellent. Now on this one, so Diana, this is not yours. So you could make a comment on that.
I think what I really appreciate about this one, especially is just kind of like the implication that the lines on the skin intersect with like the structure or the armor part of it, I guess, the skeleton portion.
Okay.
So like most of the lines are vertical, and then the stripes on the skin are horizontal. So like for me, that kind of like implies a further going of the line, maybe outside of the structure. Kind of makes me look into it a little more.
All right. Yeah, I like that. It's something that engages you by almost making an implied line. It's suggesting there's a continuation going forward. Yeah, and I like that. That's really good. So it invites you to apply your imagination to what you're seeing. How about you, Becca? Could you make a comment about that? And if your microphone isn't working, you can go ahead and type it in. All right, well, let's go ahead and go on then. But I think those are all really good comments. Well done. So the next thing, so if you guys are having any issues with the structure with skin, that's the primary reason why I wanted to go over all that kind of material, so we could look at it and see how a couple other people were solving those situations. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that's the best thing to do, because then people start copying each other. But what's nice about this class is that all of you have established your own style thoroughly enough that there's no danger of anybody copying anybody else. And I really am very grateful for that. If this was like it is, so labeled as a first year class, but all the artists that take it have established themselves enough that they have their own style. If it was like a first introduction, I'd have an issue, because then you do have things where people say, oh, I want to do that. And I'm really glad to see that you guys don't have that issue. That's really nice. What I wanted next to do is talk about the self-critique and the peer critique. And I'm going to share this. Now, you guys, I hope you guys have seen the links and the links work. If they're not working, let me know. And the links I'm talking about are the links specifically to this playlist, so from last semester. So you can see the kinds of things that people are doing on their critiques. You see that they're all either about 3 minutes or 5 minutes. I did have one person that put all the critiques that they did on the same video, and I wasn't able to grade that until they edited them apart. So you do need to turn these in separately in order to get the full points. But I wanted to watch one of these critiques, one of these self-critiques, and then have each of you make a comment about what the person was doing. Now, remember, we talked about the 4 steps of critique: is first describe, second analyze, third interpret, and fourth evaluate. So when we watch this first one, I would like you just to make mental notes of what kind of comments the person is making that fall in line with each of those 4 steps. Let's see. And let me know if you guys can hear this.
This is the biomorphic abstraction of the papier-mâché project.
Okay, can everybody hear that? Okay, all right, excellent.
By me, Brooke Anderson. I can see that this is a non-objective 3D form, and it is covered in papier-mâché, which is possibly made from old magazines or newspapers. The structure has curves throughout in places that appear to be deeper than others, as well as places that appear to be higher than others. The structure is very smooth and could appear to be something like intestines, or could even be seen as abstract 3D forms of letters or numbers. Like from this side, it could be maybe a 3 or even like a B, but just different, very abstract numbers or letters. The structure is very contained within itself. There's not really projecting forms from this main form. It's kind of all bunched together. For the analysis section, the artist has carved from this main body divots and channels in order to create the kind of bumpy or projecting forms that do flow into one another. This 3D form communicates a structure that could be similar to maybe a cylindrical material that's knotted and bunched together. This creates a piece that has a lot of movement because there are no abrupt stops or harsh edges. This is also achieved through the use of sandpaper, which allows the artist to create a very smooth and connective texture. This piece is also very balanced. There doesn't seem to be one side that's heavier than the other, which creates a big sense of harmony within the piece. For the interpret section, this piece is very conceptual. It doesn't really reflect any object directly that exists currently, but it is a very naturalistic looking form because it is so smooth and connective. It could reflect something like intestines, like I said earlier, which is obviously very humanistic because we learn about that in classes, and obviously it's a human form. For the judgment section, I do believe that this form is successful because it communicates biomorphic form and creates a pleasing piece with lots of visual interest. I believe this piece would contain value to others because it is pleasing to look at, which is one of the goals of art. And it does entertain the viewer through creating unexpected forms and waves throughout, which kind of forces the viewer and influences them to take a deeper look and keep looking at the art to find more throughout the piece and analyze how it was constructed, obviously. So I do believe that this piece was successful.
All right, so what did you think about that critique?
It sounded like a pretty solid critique to me. I think the thing that most stood out to me is that at the beginning they start off like really almost scientific when they're like describing what's going on with the structure. So they only focus on describing everything objectively and like only what they see and don't put in any like opinions or anything like that until way later or make any assumptions until like more than halfway through the video.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. She kept herself to describing alone, and that's great. And this was a self-critique, so this was her own structure that she was critiquing. That is really hard. It is very difficult to divorce yourself from your own work to that extent, but that's what you need to do for this. It is going to be the most successful when you can solidly pretend that this is the first time you've ever seen it, and you're not the one who made it. One of the reasons for that is if you can maintain that personal distance or emotional distance, then you're able to see things that your closeness to it blinds you to. And I think that's an important thing to remember when you do your self-critique. So Paula or Abby, what did you notice about the critique?
What stood out to me is I appreciated, first, I appreciated that she used very specific and descriptive words in her analysis. And then I also noticed that I just appreciated her kind of walking us through it with talking about her interpretation and her judgment and all of the specific points of the critique. So I kind of knew where she was going with it.
Yeah, I thought that was really good too. The more precise you can be with your language when you do something like this, the better it is. And that is true pretty much all the time. I don't know if you were aware, but there is nowhere in world literature before about 400 BC that the word blue appears as a word for a color. And I'm talking, you know, any language that now uses the word blue. It doesn't show up. We know that people did use blue. We see that as evidence of the paint that was applied to sculptures that were being done. And lapis was used by the Mesopotamians a lot in their work, as well as we see that with the Harappans and the early Chinese, the Jiaos. And so we know that they had blue, but there wasn't a word for it anywhere that shows up, which I think is really interesting. People would describe the sky in Homeric similes or descriptions as a bright sky or a clear sky or an open sky or dark. And they would, particularly in Greek literature, they would describe the sea as a wine dark sea, which it sounds to me like it's almost purple instead of blue. And then for one reason or another, somebody starts using a word that seems to mean blue, and then suddenly everybody sees blue. And it makes me, and it, you know, the question is, do we see more or do we observe more when our language is more precise? And I think the answer is absolutely. It's very difficult to communicate without the correct words, but it's also really difficult for us to organize our thoughts and think specifically if we don't have precise words. So I mean, that's an excellent observation. How about you, Paula? What did you get from the video?
I think something like that was already mentioned, but that they were just mainly pointing out what is like visible, like what as well as what they could see, and not like things that they would point out because they knew they were there because they made it.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Like they kept describing the forms as intestines, and you know, once somebody says that, I can't get it out of my head. That's what it looks like. But yeah, she described them as specific things that all of us can recognize, instead of doing it that we're describing it in such a way that only she was familiar with. So yeah, I think that's an excellent observation. And it wasn't just in the description, it was all the way through. In the interpretation, she's describing linking the intestines to human form, because when we think about intestines, for a lot of us, that is something that is attached almost or associated almost immediately with human type bodies and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's an excellent observation. One thing that I appreciated too is she paused briefly and then said, okay, now I'm going to be talking about the or how it was made, or the analysis, or now I'm going to be talking about the interpretation, or at the end for the judgment part. And I kind of appreciate that, because even though in the example video that I gave you from the Smart History videos on YouTube, they kind of seamlessly blend everything together. It is kind of nice when we were doing this initially to have those kinds of pause moments where we're shifting gears mentally. And a really good way to do this is even to have a printout of, hopefully none of you are at the stage where you don't know what a printout is anymore. But you could print out that page that lists the 4 steps and use those questions under each step as a guide. You don't have to read that out, but you could, as you're doing your critique, just find yourself answering each of those questions. So you have kind of a ready-made script. And this can be a difficult thing from a very personal standpoint. But I think that if you realize you're just making a video, and then everybody will see the video, nobody's going to really recognize nobody's going to stop you in the middle of campus and say, "Oh, I heard your voice on the video." They may stop you and say, "Hey, your critique was really good." So I don't allow that to intimidate you at all. And if you want to, you could re-record this several times. That's perfectly fine. But I would, it might even be good to do this with a dry run through. Don't record it, but go through those questions and stuff, either talking to somebody that like a roommate or a family member who it runs a lot slower than you, so you can tackle them and force them to listen, or just practice with an imaginary friend. Just pretend that somebody's there, and then after you do that, then record as you're talking. And I think that would help as well. But on this, if you guys get this done before, it is due in April. If you guys get this done before March 31st, you will get extra credit on it. And I would really like it if you guys, and I will give more extra credit to people who can do it within the next 2 weeks, so we can put it up on our channel so that everybody can see how our class handles this. If anybody wants to do a self-critique in the next 2 weeks, that'd be super great. If you get it done by March 31st, you will get extra credit. If you get it done within the next 2 weeks, you'll get more extra credit. And again, this needs to be a video that is in one of the final formats that's supported by both my computer and YouTube, which right now, that includes MP4, WAV, and MOV. So those three files types are ones that my computer can read and are easy to upload to YouTube. So, and if I have any, I'll ask for volunteers at the end. And if anybody is brave enough to volunteer, that'd be super awesome. And if not, I'll ask for volunteers again next week. Now, I wanted to do this same thing that we just did, but with a peer critique example of a video. So let's see. And I really don't know if the ones that I'm showing you are good or bad until we actually see it. But most of the times, I have had a couple of people redo their critiques because they did not like how they came out. And so, but I've removed those. Let's see. All right. So we are going to go down here and I'll pick one at random. Let's do this one. This is a peer critique for color cubes, which is a future assignment. And I am going to, all right. Now let me know if you can hear this.
This is the texture and color tiles done by Madison Ladower. I'm so sorry if I'm saying your name incorrectly, but I can see that there are 2 cubes.
I'm pausing this really quick. Can you guys hear that? Okay. All right. Excellent.
Cubes made of 6 different tiles each. The one on the left is constructed demonstrating using different textures, and these textures are all very different, but they chose to use rocks, those popsicle sticks, maybe that's grass or long leaves, and then tinfoil, leaves, and what appears to be paper possibly. The other cube on the left, which demonstrates color, uses a variety of colored paper. And that paper is cut out and create, the different cutouts create different patterns and demonstrate different color schemes. Both cubes demonstrate the use of very clean and sharp lines. Obviously, the texture cube doesn't have literal lines, but it's kind of implied lines. And then the colored cube uses lines because those cutouts create those lines. The color cube is more flat and contains very little texture, but the texture cube has surfaces that extend beyond that literal cube. For the analysis section, the artist has gathered different textures in colored paper in order to glue them onto those 6 tiles, and then those 6 tiles are also glued together to make the 2 different cubes. The use of so many different textures creates that variety and contrast and kind of makes that viewer interested in the piece, obviously, because it's not just all the same. The use of vertical lines and lines in general, especially in the texture cube, creates that movement within the cube, which forces the viewer's eyes to go from tile to tile. So kind of, for example, those popsicle sticks force the viewer's eyes upward and into the rocks, and your eyes kind of travel throughout those rocks and then maybe down through the grass. And the same goes for the color cube. Obviously, it has a lot of sharper lines, but those lines kind of force you from tile to tile, and then the flowing lines in some of the tiles kind of keep your eyes within that and makes the viewer want to keep looking at that tile specifically. For the interpret section, the piece is very conceptual, but communicates the effects of texture and color as well. The piece demonstrates important aspects of art and uses simple items and colors in order to create visually appealing art. Obviously, this project was relatively simple, but this artist made it very visually appealing by using such a variety of textures and different patterns and colors within those color cube. For the judgment section, I do believe this project was successful because it accurately depicts those different textures and colors, which was the given assignment, obviously. I believe it was also successful because the use of different natural textures makes this piece very relatable. You walk outside and you see all these objects, or most of these objects, so kind of engages the viewer and makes it relatable to them, which obviously makes the piece successful because one of the goals of art is to engage your viewer and make it appealing to them.
All right, excellent. Go ahead and close that. All right, so this is an assignment that we, both of these are assignments we haven't gotten to, and I think that was actually, I just picked that at random. I think that was actually the same student doing another critique. It sounded like the same voice. So again, I'd like each of you to mention something about that critique that you saw, what you thought about it. Who'd like to go first?
For that critique, I do like how they focus, what I'm guessing sounds like to me like the goals of the assignment. So I like that they interpreted that into the critique as well, instead of like, maybe not instead of, but instead of like only just focusing on what the structure is, but that they also mentioned that it fits the goals of the assignment, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. Where they're governing the success and they're making their judgment based on what they know the parameters were and the expectations were. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because for this kind of stuff, none of you guys nobody expects you to make masterworks that are going to change the face of the universe. That's not the point of this class. But a big part of the grade does come from how successful are you in accomplishing the tasks laid out for each assignment. And so, yeah, that's an excellent point. They did a really good job of articulating that. Great. Who's next?
I don't know if this counts, but I pulled out the same thing that Diana did, that I noticed throughout her critique, was that you could tell that she had a background on what was required of the assignment. So I'm copying her answer, but I'm I'm trying to think of what else. And I don't know how helpful this is, but what stood out to me is, I think you pointed this out, that it is called a critique, but that she was very positive about the students' work, pointing out so many positive aspects of what they had done with the assignment.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good observation. It's very solid, because when we hear the word critique or critical, we always think, oh, it's negative, and it's, like, how can you do better? And critique and critical, they actually have their roots in words that mean intentional or on purpose. So critical thinking is not being harsh and nasty to everybody around you. It's thinking with intention. And that's what the point of this critique is. It is not to be anything other than positive. Because, I mean, it's no skin off your nose how successful the person is. I mean, it's not going to affect you at all. But what is really interesting to me is people have made the argument, well, if you're only saying nice things, how are they going to improve? Well, it's not up to you to force them to improve. That's not your job. But on the other hand, what is really interesting is when people hear positive reinforcement, that it goes way beyond, congratulations, you showed up, you didn't do anything, but here's a ribbon anyway. Which I got that a lot when I was in 4th grade. Everybody gave me awards for showing up. But when we hear things like, I really like the rhythms that you're building, or, it's great that popsicle sticks are bringing your eyes up to the rocks, and the rocks and their randomness are bringing you over to the grass, and the grass brings you down to the bottom of the cube, and the shadow brings you over to this sticks, stuff like that. When people are telling you good, solid things about your work, it always incentivizes you to do better. And you see the good things, and you want to do more of the good things. And I think ultimately it's a lot more solid to help you way to help you improve in your work than if somebody who has no more experience than you and has less skin in the game than you do are trying to convince you that they know how you can do a better job on your own work. And that kind of stuff irritates, just rankles me, because who are they to say that? But everybody, when they can articulate the good things about your work, that's a lot easier for us to listen to. And then it does help us to improve. So yeah, Abby, I think that's an excellent observation. How about you, Paula? What did you see? Or what did you hear, rather?
Sorry, I can't really think of anything new to say.
How did you notice how she kind of identified each chapter of her critique?
Yes, I think she did it a lot more obviously than in the other ones we watched. Like she named it before starting out with what she was gonna say.
Yeah, I think that was a really good, solid thing that she did as well. And I really, again, I really like the precision of her description. The precision of the words that she used to kind of share with us her observations. I thought that was really nice. Would you guys agree that it's so much better to hear that precision rather than if somebody just says it's nice? I mean, because what does nice get you? Nothing. It doesn't go anywhere. So I really appreciate that.
I feel like another thing of like when someone tells you that, oh, it's nice, but they don't elaborate on what exactly is nice, it kind of just makes you like devalue your work more. Like it doesn't allow you to like look at your piece and like actually think about it, I guess. Like makes it feel like it's something generic.
Yeah, it feels very generic. Like, it is nice when I'm cooking. I appreciate it when my wife doesn't throw up. That's a really good sign. And I like it even better when she says, "Oh, that's nice." But when she says something like, "Wow, you did a really great job with balancing the rosemary and garlic," then I feel, hey, I did something positive. I actually succeeded. That's great. Otherwise, it feels like you're the ding dong in the back of the class and nobody likes to pay attention to, but they pat you on the head anyway because they don't want you to cry. You know, I know I'm reading more into it than I should be, but there it is. Now I wanted to, if you guys, I'd like to move on to something else really quick, and we're going to go over this again next week. But I'm hoping if you guys have a handle, do you guys feel like you understand what's going on with the structure and skin kind of thing? Okay, because the next thing that we're going to be moving into is biomorphic abstraction. And a lot of people, even though you guys know about abstraction a bit, you've already been introduced to it. I have this slide presentation that I give, and I'm going to give an abbreviated version of it right now, and then I'm going to give a more full version of it next week, and we'll elucidate it more. So I want to introduce this idea to you guys a little bit. Let's see. I'm going to share this. See if I can share it. Hold on a sec. Let's see. Aha. Okay. I can do this. But I've totally forgotten how to do the actual slideshow. Oh, there. Okay. All right. So I'm showing you guys the slideshow. The next thing that we're going to be going into is biomorphic abstraction. When we talk about abstraction, abstraction is always refers to simplifying or stylizing or distorting. It's changing the realistic or naturalistic depiction of something specifically. And we see this a lot in the ancient world. People didn't draw the same way we do, not because they were stupid at all, because artists functioned as a manifestation of the goals and the principles that guided the culture they lived in. Wassily Kandinsky pointed out in his book, Spirituality and Art, that changed about 200, 300 years ago. And it was changing through the Renaissance, and then it changed pretty profoundly a couple hundred years ago at about the same time as the events that led into the Industrial Revolution. And the artists then started moving towards a role of almost profit to the society instead of a function within the society. And the reason why I point that out at the beginning of this discussion is distortion and abstraction has always been with us. It's always been a part of the human experience as it's expressed through art. And it's almost always functioned as an example or a manifestation of the values of the society. And one simple example that I do not have illustrated in this is if you can remember what tomb drawings look like on the wall of an Egyptian tomb. You have the abstraction of the human form where it's very flat, very simple. You have a face that's always shown in profile with a specific style of eye. You have a very triangular shaped torso, stylized dress, and you can see all the fingers and all the toes because the outlines are right next to each other. The Greeks also did something similar with the hands and feet. But with the Egyptian tombs, I think most of us have seen those images, and that's a pretty good description. So the abstraction functions as a symbolization of what's important to the society through that stylized human form. And if you look online at other images from tombs, you look at images that are not designed to be part of the spells or the documentation of the individual who's died, then you will see a lot more naturalistic and realistic poses in portraiture. For example, in farm scenes or scenes on the Nile that aren't meant to symbolize a sacred ship or a sacred event. And we can see that quite a bit in ancient art, where when it was important that it means something specific to the culture, then it's stylized or abstracted. And when it's not, it's a lot more realistic. Now, looking at this image of a tree, would you say, yeah, there are some abstracted elements to it, of course, but would you say that for the most part, is this central tree abstract or more naturalistic or realistic?
More naturalistic.
Yeah, definitely. Now, and we can say that maybe these trees in the background are a little bit more abstracted, but perhaps that is to be expected, because if this is naturalistic, with the mist and the distance that are going to be present on the other shore of the lake, then it makes sense that they would look kind of like that, as almost smears of color, because that's what we would actually see. And if we look at this tree, we can see these bare branches over here, and we can see the branches down here with just a little bit of leaves, and we can see the branches over here with little buds on them almost, and we can see the trunk with dappling light down there on the texture. This does feel very naturalistic, doesn't it? When we turn to the next one, this is an image that's from the Hudson River School, which was a romantic art movement in the Americas from about 1830 to about 1860. I think you can tell that this is heading towards Impressionism. But would you say that this is more naturalistic or abstracted?
Naturalistic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this looks like it is idealized, but I mean, you can feel the moss right there on those rocks, and you can see the cow. The most abstracted parts of this whole thing are the evidence of the people, the person right there in the little boat, and the person right here. Everything else, you know, they feel very realistic. And as we go into the background, you can tell that atmospheric perspective is really beautifully portrayed, with the mountains getting more and more blue the farther they are in the distance. This tree I'm sorry, excuse me, going back. This tree right here feels very natural, and yeah, it does look very realistic. Now, if we go to this one, would you say that this is more realistic or abstracted? Now, this is kind of a trick one, and when I'm giving the presentation without any student feedback, I point out that this is more stylized. It is leaning in towards that more abstracted point of view. We can still read this as what? What is it obviously supposed to represent?
A tree.
Yeah, it's obviously a tree, but it's a very stylized tree, where the tree itself has been very simplified. It almost looks like a cartoon, but in the natural, realistic world, are you going to see every single leaf the exact same shape, the exact same size, and full front like that? Are you going to see that very often in the natural world? It's not, if you saw this walking outside, it would kind of be freaky, I think. But it is stylized. And this shows us how our ancestors, this is an example of miniature painting from Iran. And this is, I think this is more contemporary, but it is done in the style that was very popular about 700 years ago. We see the grass is symbolized by this stylized 5 or 6 stroke pattern. There's variations, but it's very similar. All the flowers are either going to be like this one, a perfect profile, or perfect frontal view. All the birds, you notice, are standing pretty much the same way. The spread of their feet varies a little bit, but they're almost all in profile with their heads going in different ways. This one is kind of in profile with the head going opposite, and so is this one over on the right, but these other two are in profile with their heads, with their beaks facing the same way as their fronts. And then the persimmons, we can identify them, but they are very stylized. And the reason why I'm pointing out this is that it is abstracted, it's simplified, it is stylized, and it's still very readable as a tree. Now, if we go to this one, what would your reaction be if you actually saw this growing in a forest?
That doesn't belong in the real world. That is 2D.
Yeah, exactly. It is very abstracted, but it's also very obviously a tree. It's abstracted because it's all flat, it's all the solid color. There is absolutely no shading whatsoever to it. and you get a very distinct solid silhouette. This is the state flag for New Hampshire, I believe. And this is intended to represent the Tree of Liberty. But what is interesting to me is even though we can identify this immediately as a tree, that's through our shared appreciation for visual vocabulary. It's not because this looks specifically or realistically or naturalistically like a real world tree. And I think if we saw that in the middle of a forest, it would be freaky. Now, what do you think that this image is? Keeping up with the theme that we've established. What is this?
That's not like a Japanese characters.
Yes, but what does it represent?
A tree.
A tree?
Yeah, absolutely. This is kanji for tree. And it's Japanese kanji. What is this vertical stroke? What do you think that represents or symbolizes from the tree?
So like the trunk.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have these two diagonals that symbolize those sloping branches like we saw in the flag of New Hampshire right here. And then this line is going to be alternatively the horizon line or just the root ball, with the ground where the tree is growing on. And it is incredibly stylized. But if you didn't have any context, what would you think that that could be? I mean, it would be almost impossible, wouldn't it? If you just saw this without any context whatsoever.
I think without any context, I think it was like a chicken print.
Yeah, it almost looks like a footprint. Yeah. And
I read insect.
yeah. But we can see all sorts of other things into it. And this is a really good example of how abstraction works. The artist has simplified a tree to the extent where it's almost unrecognizable unless you have that cognitive key that the artist shares with their immediate audience. And in this case, people who could read Japanese kanji. But for the rest of us, without that shared context, it's very difficult to understand. But you can see how the artist has taken the form of a tree and simplified it and distorted it and parsed it down until it is almost not recognizable unless you have that cognitive key. And I think that that's a really interesting way to see how abstraction has grown from this naturalistic and romanticized version of a tree to a more stylized version of a tree to an abstracted symbol of a tree to this very abstracted symbol of a tree. And I think that's a fascinating way to see how abstraction progresses. Now, keeping with that theme, what do we know that this is a representation of?
I would say that'd be like a forest, just because there's more than one stroke of green.
Yeah, we can assume it's a tree because of the context. And you said a really good thing. The clue that these are trees is the stroke of green. And the woman who did this, I asked her permission to use this image in the class, and she was kind of excited. She said, yeah, she loves using these colors because they remind her of the feeling she gets when she's around trees outside, and that's what the treeness is for her, just that vertical stroke in the color. And, we can kind of read maybe this brown area is perhaps a trunk, but it is so abstracted, even with context, it kind of requires you to think critically about it, think intentionally about it to kind of derive a meaning from it. But if you don't want to see a tree, there's no obligation to. This is abstracted to the point where you can just appreciate it because it's colorful greens on a silver background, and that's it. You don't need to engage it any further. But if you want to address it as a tree, you can do that too. And that's one of the things that I think is kind of magical about abstraction, is that the artist is opening things up with through the process of abstraction and expanding meanings, making us, well, forcing us, the viewer, to engage in an active role to develop the meaning of the piece. So we are collaborating with the artist through the process of abstraction to kind of develop and communicate the meaning that's there, because a lot of the meaning is now derived from us and what we think about the piece. And that's why I say it's collaboration, because the artist just initiated it, but we're completing it pretty much. I think that that's absolutely fascinating. I wanted to share something else with you. Keeping up with that, what do you think? This is a painting by Pete Mondrian. He was the founder of the Jugendstil movement. What is this a painting of? And the answer is obvious, but it is not obvious when you look at the painting. Anybody want to guess what this is?
I'd say if we're keeping with the context of like trees and everything, I'd guess like roots maybe.
I think anybody's guess is equally valid. But yeah, it is still a tree. But in this case, this is a landscape of a park with a tree in it. This is the tree. And this also suggests the tree. But this horizontal line in the middle is the horizon. This horizontal line up top is the sky with the clouds. These are continuations of other trees in the park, as well as this. And these are some pathways in the park. And this right here is our tree. But it's so abstracted that there's no way that you'd ever be able to guess that, is there? I mean, would any of you look at this and say right off the bat, oh yeah, it's a tree. It's a landscape. I can see the park. Were any of you able to, or did any of you react that way the first time you saw this painting?
I didn't.
Yeah, and I think if we're all being honest, none of us did. And that's one of the beautiful things I think about a lot of Pete Mondrian's work, is that every once in a while you come to something where when you engage with what the artist has to say about it, say for example in their title, or for what they had to say about their own works, or for example their own worldview, then we can kind of extrapolate what the painting is. But in this, a lot of the meaning has to come from us and what we lay onto it. And that was perfectly fine. Pete Mondrian was a painter at a time when the world was just starting to move absurdly fast, ridiculously fast. 100 years earlier, there's one of the first times somebody writes what it feels like to be in a train in England. It was an actress, and she wrote in 1835 after riding on the first steam locomotive in England, went up to a whopping 35 miles an hour. And she said it was like feeling like a bird with the freedom that they have when they speed in their flying, when they're on their wings and they're flying. That's how it felt. She felt free. And I was thinking, terrified at the speed. And I was thinking, it's 35 miles an hour. My grandma would drive faster than that. And she was really careful. But then we think about what we have today and how much faster we travel today. But at Pete Mondrian's time, this is when people around the world in droves are starting to get flush toilets inside. A whole apartment block does not have to share the same bathroom. This is a time when people are putting up telephone lines, around in the landscape. So if you live in a city, there's all these telephone lines going from roof to roof. This is a time when there's all these roads that are being paved and being used by more and more traffic. People are traveling everywhere. People are moving everywhere. People are getting overwhelmed and caught up in all this sudden communication. And one of the things that he wanted to do was try to find a sense of calm in the world. And so he started simplifying everything to horizontal, vertical lines and limiting his palette to essentially the primary colors. So this really demonstrates in this incredible abstraction kind of his grasping for a sense of self and place in the world that did not include any of the chaos of the modern world. And I think, can you guys see that in this? That simplification? Now I include this because the first time I showed that and described it to people, nobody believed me. They thought I was full of crap. But Pete Mondrian started as a post-impressionist. This reminds me very much of, I would not be surprised if Van Gogh had done this. Would you guys? I mean, this looks like that kind of post-impressionist stuff that Van Gogh was working on, doesn't it? Very
Yeah, it's
exciting.
very similar, like even down to the color schemes used, like the blue.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's beautiful. You know, it's exploring those same kind of things that Van Gogh was exploring with the work that he was doing. I think it's gorgeous. And then this, the top middle one. Now, I'll tell you, all 6 of these are by Pete Mondrian, and they are taken. He painted the exact same tree, and these are about, I want to say, 5 years apart, something like that. So this top middle one, if we're talking about it, you know, one of the keys to abstraction is simplifying. Can you see how he's simplifying the tree in this one and simplifying the image? What's one way he simplified the tree?
I would say he kind of like didn't put as much detail into each and every root and started not root, a branch, and then he started connecting them.
Yeah, definitely. That is a huge one. There's one other huge simplification that he used, and what's that?
It looks like he started maybe seeing the tree as vertical and horizontal lines. And as he abstracted it, it kind of, I don't know, pulled them out, and then he really focused on those directional lines.
Yeah, very definitely. He's simplifying the branches, but he's also simplifying the direction of the branches. Another thing to point out is that his color scheme is dramatically simplified. This is all grayscale. So, you know, those 3 things, simplifying the forms themselves, simplifying the directions, like what Abby said, and also simplifying the colors. So he's really parsing it down quite a bit. And then on the top right, I think this one, like this in the middle, he's simplifying all the wild colors here to grayscale. But on this one, I think he's simplifying it a little bit more. He's only using a couple shades. Like here, he uses several different shades of gray. He's only using a couple shades, but he's warming it up quite a bit. And the other thing that he's abstracting is those branches. Like Abby said, there are a lot more horizontal, a lot more vertical feel to them. And like what Diana was saying, the lines are a lot clearer. The lines are a lot simpler. And this tree is, I mean, it's the same tree, but it looks like to me he's standing on the opposite side of it. And then this one, it feels to me like he's standing the same side as he did on this one. It looks to me like the same view of the tree, because we see these branches here are mimicked right here. And I think so I'm pretty sure it's the same. It's the identical tree from the same perspective. But all 3 of these are of the same tree. And then we get to this bottom left one. On this one, I think he's adding a little bit more color. And it's abstracting the color because the colors are not in places that you would normally expect to see them. If this is all the same tree, which it is, and he's kind of brightening up, but he's using the same simple color palette of this, where he has this kind of pinkish tone, a kind of brown tone, and a kind of amber tone, and a kind of blue tone. And you can see that there's the amber, there's the pink right there, there's the blues and the browns. I think that if you use brighter colors, this would be really obnoxious, but because he's using a really toned down, calm color palette, this feels very comforting. And I think it's beautiful. But if here you can kind of make out the tree, here you definitely make out the tree. But by the time it gets to this point, can any of you see the tree? If you didn't know this was the same tree, would any of you be able to tell that? I think it's impossible to. Now in this bottom middle, these last two, he is turning to the same side of the tree as this one. So these three are all the opposite side. And then this one, he's returning to the same side of the tree. How do I know that? Anybody want to guess?
I would say like the direction of the lines. So in the middle three images, they look more horizontal, but in these last bottom two, in comparison to the first one, they look more vertical.
There's definitely some of that going on, and you're right. This kind of taupe colored rectangle that's taller and more vertical is this trunk right here. So, and that's the only clue that we're returning to that first view of the tree. But the rest of it is so abstracted now that it is almost impossible to tell that it's a tree. And then we get to this one, he is simplifying the colors. He's leaving this kind of warm, comfortable palette. And this, he's starting to get into his using only primary colors. We aren't quite there because he's using orange and gray. But this way, the only way that we know that this is the same tree is because we have that kind of roughly vertical rectangle here. I'm saying in comparison to these two horizontal ones, and this black rectangle represents that same trunk. And so this area, this clump of trunks and heavy branches right here is this big red rectangle. And then these narrower branches moving up into the sky becomes this. And we can kind of see in this abstraction where maybe the sun is hitting a little bit. But the only reason we can lay any of that on it is because we are assuming this is a tree because he said it is, and we think it might be because that's what the theme is. But there's no way of knowing outside of that, with these two images, there's no really way of knowing that it's a tree because it's been so thoroughly abstracted. Let's see, I'm going to try to, there we go. So I'm returning, okay, you guys can see me again right now, right? The slideshow's over, okay. So can you kind of see how that abstraction develops as people are simplifying and distorting and stylizing? And we'll go over that again next week and talk about it a little bit more. When we talk about biomorphic, what the difference is, and when you go through the background on that module and see the different artists that are there, you can really see this. Biomorphic, bio means life, and morphic means shape or change. And so when we're talking about biomorphic, what we're talking about is kind of the distorted shapes that look very organic, is what we're referring to. And when you see Brancusi or some of the other artists in that background selection of artists, I want you to pay particular attention to the organic nature of the shapes that they develop. They're not going to look like one-to-one correspondences to anything in our shared world. They're stylizing, they're distorting, and they're simplifying. That's what abstraction means. And what we are looking at is artists who are kind of owning a responsibility and engaging with the freedom of making their own visual language. So they are developing themes that they find fascinating. And when you do your own biomorphic abstracting sculptures, I want you to be thinking about shapes like leaves and seaweed, coral, teeth, ears, maybe, fingertips, beans, fruit, the inside of tomatoes, these kinds of growing type forms that we don't typically see outside of really understandable, approachable context. And that's what we're going to be engaging with a little bit next week. Now, as we close up today, and thank you very much for everybody's endurance and patience. I appreciate everybody having things to say during this. This has been great. Do any of you have any questions of any of the material that we covered? All right, excellent. Now, I would like you guys or everybody to think about anybody who wants to volunteer to do either self or peer critique within the next week or two. If you do that in the next 2 weeks, you will get more, extra credit. And if everybody who does it before March 31st, you'll get a couple extra points on each of those videos. But I'd like to see what you guys can come up with. If anybody'd like to take a shot at doing that over the next 2 weeks, and just to see how it is. The other issue is occasionally, it doesn't happen very often, somebody will completely misunderstand this assignment and they'll turn in a video. And if it doesn't meet the parameters of the assignment, then we can't use it or get points for it in the class. And if you do this early, it gives you a better opportunity to, in case that happens, to redo the critique and then turn it in again. Now, I say that over the last 150 students I've had, that's only happened like 3 times. But if you're concerned it might happen with you, go ahead and get it done early too. But if any of you guys, if anybody in the class wants to turn this in within the next 2 weeks, either one or both, you will get more extra credit. All right. And then I can point everybody to your works so that everybody can see what true excellence looks like. So, all right. If there's no further questions or anything, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I really appreciate you guys being with me tonight. And I know we went a little bit over the hour and a half, so I do appreciate your patience, and we were able to cover quite a bit. So thank you very much for your engagement tonight and for visiting with me. I hope you guys have an absolutely awesome week and weekend, and do your best not to get arrested.